I'm gonna slap you again if you don't obey my instructions!
The slap echoed through the terminal. Naomi Carter's head snapped to the side, her cheek burning from the force of the impact. Her hand instinctively flew to her face, her eyes wide in disbelief, staring at the woman who had just struck her. A woman who was supposed to be a caring flight attendant, a woman who was supposed to respect her. Freeze frame. What happened next would cost careers, reputations, and millions. You see, Christine had no idea who she was dealing with. And in just a few short hours, everything would change. Welcome to Living Black Stories. Here we share powerful and inspiring tales of resilience, strength, and triumph. If you love stories that empowers and motivates you, please join us. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the notifications bell, and tell us where you are watching from in the comments. But to understand how we got here, we need to rewind. 6 hours earlier, Naomi Carter, 32, 6 months pregnant, was packing her bag for a crucial business trip to Chicago. She moved with purpose, folding clothes with precise efficiency, the kind of meticulous planning she put into everything, whether it was designing the buildings that would shape skylines or managing the million-dollar contracts that were slowly but surely making her a force to be reckoned with in the world of architecture. She looked at the baby bump in the mirror, running her hand over it gently, a bittersweet smile tugging at her lips. Being pregnant had its challenges, especially on a business trip like this. But Naomi wasn't the type to show weakness. She had worked tirelessly to get where she was, growing up in a modest household, attending Princeton on scholarships, and proving herself every step of the way. Her design firm had just landed a $50 million contract, and this trip would be the final seal on that deal. Despite the exhaustion that gnawed at her bones, Naomi pushed the thought aside. She wasn't just a pregnant woman traveling for business. She was Naomi Carter, the woman who earned every inch of success she had. She had fought for it, and no one, not even her growing belly, was going to slow her down. But as she zipped her bag, her phone rang. It was David, her husband. David Carter, 35, self-made, owner of SkyBridge Airlines, a company he had inherited from his late father and expanded beyond anyone's wildest expectations. He had a way about him, a quiet strength that spoke volumes without him ever needing to raise his voice. Most people didn't even know what he looked like. He kept a low profile, letting his work and success speak for him. "Naomi, I've already upgraded your ticket," David said, his voice calm but firm. "No, David, I don't need special treatment," Naomi replied, her voice steady but insistent. "I earned this contract on my own merit. I'll fly economy just like everyone else." David chuckled softly, his protective nature coming through. "You're 6 months pregnant, Naomi. You deserve a little comfort. Let me do this for you." She sighed, the exhaustion starting to seep through the cracks of her resolve. "Fine, but I'm doing this on my terms. I'll call if anything happens, okay?" David's response was a quiet promise. "Take care of yourself, Naomi. I'll see you soon." Their goodbye was tender, but their connection was undeniable. 4 years of marriage built on trust, respect, and love. They didn't need to say much. They understood each other perfectly. Naomi arrived at the airport just as the crowds were starting to thicken. She felt the familiar tension rise in her chest, the crowds, the noise, the rush. But she pushed it all down, focusing on the task at hand. As she walked through the terminal, she could feel the small microaggressions creeping in. The TSA agent scrutinized her a little longer than necessary, eyeing her with judgment as though her pregnant belly was some kind of inconvenience. A passenger bumped into her without so much as an apology. Naomi bit her tongue, choosing to rise above it all. After all, she had a goal, and nothing, not even these small slights, would get in her way. She boarded SkyBridge Airlines Flight 847 to Chicago, finding her seat in economy, the middle seat. It was cramped, uncomfortable, but she didn't mind. She could have flown first class, but she had chosen this seat for one simple reason. She didn't want anyone to think she was using her pregnancy to get ahead. She was here on her own terms. And nothing was going to stop her. But what Naomi didn't know was that this flight, this seemingly ordinary flight, was about to change everything. Can you believe the treatment she's getting already? How would you handle it? Let me know in the comments below, and if you're loving this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Christine Morrison, 41, had been a senior flight attendant for 15 years. Her appearance was always immaculate, every strand of her hair perfectly in place, her uniform pressed and pristine. But it was the coldness in her eyes that told the real story. Her smile? Forced, as if it were just another part of the uniform, something she had to wear to get through the day. Christine had always dreamed of climbing higher in the airline industry, but each time she applied for a corporate position, she was passed over. 3 times in fact. And each time the bitterness grew. She'd been stuck on the same flight route, serving the same passengers, watching younger attendants with less experience get promoted. It ate away at her, the feeling that she deserved more but had been overlooked again and again. Her frustrations, rather than being channeled into improvement, spilled over into every interaction she had with passengers she deemed beneath her. Her assistant, Rachel, who was 28 and had only been with the airline for a couple of years, often found herself uncomfortable with Christine's behavior. Rachel was kind, eager to please, and usually tried to deflect the tension, but she couldn't ignore the way Christine treated the passengers. It wasn't right, but Christine was protected by her seniority and the union, making it difficult for anyone to say anything. She had a history of complaints, all swept under the rug. The plane had just leveled out after takeoff, and Naomi, now settled in her middle seat in economy class, shifted uncomfortably. At 6 months pregnant, traveling was more exhausting than she had anticipated, but she was determined not to let it get to her. She glanced over at Rachel, who had just passed by with a beverage cart, and politely asked, "Could I get some water? And maybe a pillow? I'm having some discomfort." Rachel, with her warm, friendly smile, nodded immediately. "Of course, I'll get that for you right away." But before she could move, Christine appeared at Rachel's side, her expression hardening as she noticed Naomi sitting in her seat. "We don't have extra pillows," Christine said, her voice cool and condescending. "They're for first-class passengers." Naomi, maintaining her composure, nodded. "I understand. Then maybe just some water, please?" Christine's smile barely reached her eyes as she responded, "The beverage service hasn't started yet. You'll have to wait." Rachel, visibly uncomfortable, shifted on her feet but didn't speak up. Naomi's disappointment flickered for a moment, but she said nothing, quietly accepting the situation. That was until an elderly white woman sitting next to Naomi, Margaret, leaned over, offering Naomi her own pillow with a whisper, "That attendant has always been nasty." Naomi gave Margaret a soft smile, appreciating the gesture. She nodded, thankful for the kindness of a stranger, but also quietly noting that Margaret's words would prove to be important later. The tension, though, was just beginning to rise. A little while later, as the plane prepared for cruising altitude, Naomi reached up to adjust her carry-on bag in the overhead bin. The pregnancy was making simple tasks like this more difficult, but Naomi was determined to do it herself. Her breath caught slightly as she stretched, trying to maneuver the heavy bag into place. That's when Christine appeared, her voice cutting through the quiet hum of the cabin. "You need to sit down now. We're about to take off." Naomi's hands froze on the bag as she turned to face Christine, the suddenness of her tone catching her off guard. "I just need 1 second, Naomi said, her voice calm but firm. "The bag is just a bit." "I said sit down," Christine snapped, her voice raising, now louder than necessary. "Are you unable to follow simple instructions?" The cabin grew quiet. Naomi could feel the eyes of the passengers on her, their gazes heavy, expectant. Naomi's face flushed, not from anger, but from the hurt of being spoken to like that. She straightened up slowly, standing taller than before, yet the sting of Christine's words still landed deeply. "There's no need to speak to me that way," Naomi said, her voice unwavering but the hurt visible in her eyes. Christine's response was sharp. "There's a need when passengers act entitled." Naomi felt the weight of Christine's words, but before she could respond, a young black businessman seated a few rows behind Naomi stood up. His name was Marcus, 28, and he had been watching the interaction unfold. He'd been following the exchange, uncomfortable with how Naomi was being treated. "She wasn't being entitled," Marcus spoke up, his voice clear, firm. "She just needed help." Christine turned on him, her glare icy and cold. "Unless you want to be removed from this flight, I suggest you mind your business," she threatened, her words hanging heavy in the air. Marcus faltered for a moment, clearly taken aback by her aggression, but instead of backing down completely, he discreetly pulled out his phone, starting to record the interaction. He wasn't going to let this go unnoticed. The tension only escalated from there, the atmosphere in the cabin thick with discomfort. The rest of the flight continued, but Naomi couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to get worse. Midway through the flight, Naomi felt the familiar discomfort in her belly, signaling it was time to visit the restroom. She glanced at the line. A few passengers were ahead of her, and the wait was long. Naomi took a breath, patient as ever, rubbing her belly gently, trying to calm her nerves. But then Christine walked by, her cold eyes landing on Naomi. "You need to return to your seat," she barked, stopping in front of Naomi. Naomi blinked, surprised at the sudden command. "I'm waiting for the restroom," Naomi replied, trying to keep her voice steady. Christine's gaze flicked over Naomi, her expression dismissive. The business class restroom is available. But that's not for economy passengers, she added, her emphasis on the words, economy passengers, as she looked Naomi up and down. Naomi's heart sank, but she kept her posture straight, not letting the sting of Christine's words show. She wasn't going to let this woman get to her. Finally, Naomi was able to use the restroom, and as she returned to her seat, she placed a hand protectively over her growing belly. Anxiety began to build, the emotional toll of the interaction settling in. She touched her belly again, a protective instinct rising within her. The frustration, the humiliation, it was all starting to take its toll. Would you have stayed calm in Naomi's shoes, or would you have confronted Christine? Let me know what you think in the comments below. And if you're hooked on this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button to stay updated for the rest of the drama. The beverage and snack service began just like any other. The flight attendants moved down the aisle, offering drinks and small snacks, each passenger receiving the same courteous treatment. But as Christine reached Naomi's row, she bypassed her entirely, serving everyone around her but leaving Naomi to sit in the middle seat, overlooked. Naomi at first thought it was just an oversight. Maybe Christine was just focused on the other passengers, distracted. But as the cart moved farther down the aisle, Naomi's patience started to thin. She shifted in her seat, trying to make herself visible without being confrontational. She waited. Then Christine passed by again. Naomi, with a calm and polite tone, said, "Excuse me, I didn't receive anything." Christine didn't stop. She didn't even look at Naomi. "We ran out," she said flatly. Naomi blinked, taken aback. She had seen the cart half full when it passed by the first time. "That's not true," Margaret, the elderly woman sitting next to Naomi, said softly but firmly. "I can see carts are still half full." Christine's expression went cold, and she turned on Margaret without hesitation. "Are you the flight attendant or am I?" Her words sliced through the air, dismissing Margaret completely. Margaret's face flushed and she fell silent, realizing it was no use. Naomi, however, couldn't sit back any longer. She had been trying to stay composed, trying to avoid any more confrontation, but the blatant disregard for her felt like a slap in the face. Then Rachel, the younger attendant who had been quietly observing, moved quickly down the aisle when Christine wasn't looking. She quietly placed a small tray of crackers and juice in front of Naomi, her eyes darting nervously as she whispered, "I'm so sorry. She's not usually this. I mean, this is wrong." Naomi looked at Rachel, surprised by the kindness, but also shocked that Rachel had noticed, let alone had the courage to do anything about it. Naomi quietly mouthed, "Thank you," as Rachel hurried away, trying to avoid being caught. Naomi sat back in her seat, taking a deep breath, realizing then that the targeting wasn't accidental. It was intentional. And that realization stung deeper than anything else. But it wasn't over. Turbulence hit, the plane jostling in the air as the seatbelt sign illuminated above their heads. Naomi instinctively grabbed her armrest, her phone buzzing in her pocket. It was a text from David. She quickly tapped the screen, her thumb moving fast as she texted back, "All good, love you." But before she could even set the phone down, Christine appeared out of nowhere, her cold eyes locking onto Naomi. "Phones must be in airplane mode," Christine barked, her voice sharp, her face betraying no warmth. Naomi looked up, surprised. "It is, I'm just texting." Before Naomi could even finish her sentence, Christine snatched the phone from her hand, her fingers gripping it with a force that made Naomi flinch. "You're violating federal regulations," Christine said, her tone icy, condescending. Naomi stood up in shock, her protective instincts kicking in. "What are you doing? Give me my phone back." Christine's grip tightened and she took a step back, holding the phone out of Naomi's reach. "You'll get it back when we land. Consider yourself lucky I don't have the captain radio ahead for airport police." Naomi's heart raced, her mind reeling with disbelief. "You cannot take my personal property," she snapped, her voice trembling now, the reality of what was happening sinking in. "Sit down now," Christine barked, her voice echoing through the cabin as all eyes turned toward them. The passengers were watching now, some whispering, some pulling out their phones, recording the scene. Naomi's chest tightened, the frustration boiling over, mixing with the vulnerability of her pregnancy. Her voice cracked, strained with emotion. "I have done nothing wrong. Why are you treating me like this?" Christine leaned in close, her breath hot on Naomi's face. She whispered just loud enough for nearby passengers to hear, her words dripping with venom, "Maybe if you people learned respect, you'd get better treatment." The words hung in the air, each one cutting deeper than the last. The gasps from the surrounding passengers were audible, as shock rippled through the cabin. Naomi stood there, feeling her legs weaken, her heart pounding in her chest. Marcus, the young businessman who had stood up for Naomi earlier, couldn't stay silent anymore. His voice rang out clear and firm. "That's completely out of line." Christine turned toward Marcus, her expression twisted with fury. But before she could respond, Naomi took a deep breath, her mind racing. She wasn't going to let this woman make her feel smaller. The whole plane was watching now. The weight of the situation wasn't lost on Naomi. The disrespect, the mistreatment, it wasn't just about her, it was about something much larger. The more she stood there, the more she realized that what Christine was doing wasn't an isolated incident. It wasn't just about a flight attendant throwing her weight around. It was about power, control, and targeting someone who had no choice but to sit quietly and take it. What do you think? Was Christine completely out of line, or do you think Naomi could have handled it differently? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're following Naomi's story, make sure to hit that subscribe button because trust me, it only gets crazier from here. Naomi's heart raced, her breath shallow as she stared at Christine, the woman who had held her phone hostage for what felt like an eternity. Her eyes were welling with tears, but her voice remained steady, though there was a tremor beneath the surface. "Give me back my phone. Please." Her hand reached out, trembling slightly as she tried to take the phone from Christine's grip. But Christine, with a swift motion, jerked it away, holding it just out of reach. Naomi's frustration boiled over. The stress of the situation, her pregnancy hormones raging, and the sheer humiliation of it all, it was too much. "I need to call my husband," she pleaded, her voice cracking. Christine, without missing a beat, mocked her. "Oh, you need your husband? Can't handle things yourself?" Her tone was biting, and Naomi could feel the malice in every word. Naomi's hand instinctively went to her belly, a protective gesture. Her heart skipped a beat as she felt a sharp contraction, the stress weighing down on her. Christine saw it, a dark smirk crossing her face as she sneered. "Are you seriously trying to play the pregnancy card?" Naomi's breath hitched in her chest. "I think something's wrong with my baby," she whispered, fear creeping into her voice. Christine's response was cold, cruel. "I think you're a liar." And in that moment, everything snapped. Naomi, desperate, her nerves frayed from the constant mistreatment, reached again for her phone. This time, her voice was filled with raw desperation. "Please, give it back." Christine didn't hesitate. Without warning, she raised her hand and slapped Naomi across the face. The sound echoed through the cabin. A sharp, sickening crack. Complete silence followed for what felt like an eternity. Naomi stumbled back, her hand instinctively going to her cheek, the shock of the slap numbing every part of her body. She couldn't comprehend what had just happened. The pain wasn't just physical. It was the humiliation, the violation of her space, the utter disbelief that someone would dare to do this to her. And then the silence was shattered by the voices of the passengers. "Oh my God. Did she just... Someone help her." Rachel, frantic, rushed over to Naomi. "Christine, what did you do?" Her voice was filled with panic, and Naomi could see the horror in her eyes. Marcus, the young businessman, had been recording everything from the moment Christine had snatched Naomi's phone. He wasn't going to let this go unnoticed. Margaret, the elderly woman who had quietly observed the entire situation, stood up and rushed to Naomi's side, helping her back to her seat. The cabin was in chaos, passengers standing up, some yelling, some just staring in disbelief at what had just unfolded. A crackling voice suddenly came through the intercom. The captain's voice, calm but with a hint of tension. "What's going on back there?" Rachel, still in shock but determined to do the right thing, quickly grabbed the intercom and responded. "We have a situation, passenger was assaulted." Christine, her voice defensive, tried to shift the blame. "She attacked me first. I was defending myself." But the passengers were not having it. One by one they shouted over her, all their voices blending into one furious chorus. "That's a lie. We saw everything. She hit a pregnant woman." Naomi, her hands shaking, gently placed one over her belly. She closed her eyes, whispering, "Please, I just need to make sure my baby is okay." Rachel, trembling, hurried over with a first aid kit, bringing an ice pack to Naomi's face. The cold against her skin was a small comfort in the middle of the storm, but Naomi could feel the tears threatening to spill. Just then the co-pilot emerged from the cockpit, his face stern and resolute. He walked straight to Christine, who stood frozen, her defiance crumbling in the face of authority. "You're relieved of duty. Now," he commanded. Christine's eyes flashed with fury. You can't do that. I have union protection. Her voice shook with anger, but the co-pilot stood his ground. You just assaulted a passenger. Go to the back. Now. Christine's face twisted in rage as she stormed off, but not before she shot Naomi a venomous glare. You're going to regret this, she hissed, the words dripping with malice. The tension in the cabin was suffocating as the captain's voice came through once again. An emergency medical team will meet the plane upon landing. Naomi's breath hitched, her tears finally spilling over as the weight of everything came crashing down on her. The stress, the fear, the injustice, it was all too much. She couldn't hold it in anymore. Her body trembled with sobs and Margaret, ever the gentle soul, took Naomi's hand in hers, squeezing it tightly. You're going to be okay, Margaret whispered, her voice steady but filled with compassion. Rachel, looking guilty and ashamed, leaned in close to Naomi, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm so sorry. I should have said something earlier. I should have helped you. Naomi wiped her tears, her voice thick with emotion. It's not your fault, she said quietly, her voice barely audible. You tried. And though Naomi's body shook with fear and anger, one thing was clear, the fight wasn't over. There were still consequences to be faced, and she wasn't going to let Christine's actions slide. What do you think? Should Naomi have fought back sooner? Or was her response the best way to handle the situation? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button for more updates on Naomi's fight for justice. You won't want to miss what happens next. The plane touched down with a soft thud, its wheels kissing the tarmac as it came to a stop. But for Naomi, the real journey was just beginning. The moment the seatbelt sign flicked off, the cabin door opened, and the hustle of airport personnel flooded in. EMTs were the first to board, rushing down the aisle with urgency. Naomi, still in shock and physically drained, felt hands gently guiding her out of her seat. Her body was a tangled mess of anxiety, pain, and exhaustion. The paramedics quickly checked her vitals, blood pressure elevated from stress as expected, and they moved to her belly, listening to the baby's heartbeat. Naomi's heart raced, her chest tightening with fear, but the EMTs assured her, "The baby's fine, Miss Carter. We're just going to get you checked out at the hospital for observation. You've been through a lot." Relief washed over Naomi like a wave, but it was brief. The realization of what had just happened was still too fresh, too raw. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was in a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. As the EMTs prepared to transport her to the hospital, the door to the cabin swung open again. This time it was airport police stepping onto the plane with authority. They immediately began interviewing witnesses, trying to piece together what had happened. Naomi felt exhausted, drained, and all she could think about was one thing: getting her phone back. Marcus, the young businessman who had stood up for Naomi earlier, stepped forward, holding his phone out for the officers. "I've got video footage," he said, his voice firm, determined. "It's all here. You need to see this." The officers nodded and took the phone, beginning to review the footage. Meanwhile, multiple passengers gave their statements, their voices overlapping, each one recounting the chaos they had witnessed. Christine, now escorted off the plane by security, shot Naomi a venomous glare. She was still defiant, still trying to maintain control, but it was clear her reign of terror was over. Naomi, on the other hand, barely had the strength to stand. Her body ached, her mind was a blur of frustration and confusion. She only wanted one thing now: to call David. The moment she was handed her phone back, Naomi's hands shook as she dialed her husband's number. She could barely get the words out, the tears coming in waves. "Baby, something happened." "I'm okay, the baby's okay, but..." Her voice cracked, the weight of the day finally breaking through. David's voice came through the line, calm at first, but then sharp with concern. "Where are you? What happened?" "I'm coming right now." Naomi tried to explain, the words coming out in a jumble of emotion. She could hear the shift in David's tone. The warmth and tenderness of a husband were gone. What replaced it was cold, calculating, businessman David, the one she knew all too well. "What flight were you on?" His voice was icy, all business now. Naomi, still in shock, answered quietly. "Flight 847. Your airline." "David, don't." "I'll be there in 20 minutes, David said, his words cutting through the panic in Naomi's chest. "Don't talk to anyone from the airline until I get there." David's tone had completely changed. This was no longer the man who had kissed her goodbye that morning. This was someone else, someone she had never wanted to see, the man who would stop at nothing to protect what was his. Naomi sat there, the phone pressed to her ear, her heart pounding. It wasn't just about the slap anymore. It wasn't just about Christine's abuse. It was about something much bigger now. David was coming, and he wasn't just coming as her husband. He was coming as the owner of SkyBridge Airlines. As Naomi sat there trying to steady herself, a man approached her from the side. He was in his mid-40s, wearing a suit that looked just a little too formal for the situation. He cleared his throat nervously before speaking. "Miss Carter, I'm so sorry about this incident," he said, his voice tentative. "We're taking this very seriously." Naomi, exhausted and emotionally drained, barely looked at him. "I just want to go home," she said flatly, her voice dull with exhaustion. The man, who introduced himself as Stephen, the airport customer service manager, seemed to falter at her words. "We'd like to offer you compensation, complimentary flights." Naomi cut him off, the weariness in her voice giving way to determination. "I don't want anything. I want that woman to never do this to anyone else." Stephen hesitated, caught off guard. "I assure you there will be consequences. Can I get your contact information for our investigation?" Naomi sighed, her eyes not meeting his. She gave him her details, knowing that this was just the beginning. The investigation, the reports, the paperwork, it would all be part of the process. But it wasn't about the process. Not anymore. As Stephen took down her contact information, his assistant whispered something in his ear. Stephen's face suddenly went pale. He looked at Naomi, then back at the tablet he was typing on. His fingers moved quickly across the screen, his eyes scanning the information. Naomi noticed the change in his demeanor, but she couldn't bring herself to care. She just wanted to go home, to feel safe, to put the events of the day behind her. But then Stephen's voice trembled as he spoke to his assistant. "Get regional management on the phone. Now." He looked back at Naomi, his face now a mask of panic. The realization hit her like a ton of bricks. She didn't know it yet, but her life was about to change forever. What do you think is going on with Stephen's reaction? Why is he so panicked? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe, you won't want to miss what happens next. David's footsteps echoed in the quiet terminal as he walked briskly toward the gate, his eyes fixed ahead. He wasn't dressed in a suit or anything that screamed SEAL. No, David was wearing a simple sweater and jeans, blending in with the crowd. He didn't carry himself with the air of a man used to commanding boardrooms. Instead, he moved like anyone else, as if the weight of his success wasn't something he needed to flaunt. But his purpose here wasn't to be noticed. He wasn't interested in the usual fanfare or corporate hierarchy. He was here for Naomi, for his wife, and nothing else mattered. When David reached Naomi, he didn't hesitate. He enveloped her in a careful embrace, his hands gentle but firm, as if holding her was the only thing that made sense in the chaos that surrounded them. He pulled back slightly, his eyes scanning her face. The slap mark was still visible, a stark reminder of what had just happened. His jaw clenched with silent fury, but his voice, when it came, was low, controlled. "Tell me everything. Every single detail." Naomi, her hands trembling, recounted the events as best as she could, every word heavy with the pain of what she had endured. She told him about Christine's treatment, about the humiliation, about the slap. As she spoke, passengers who had witnessed the incident, Margaret and Marcus, stepped forward, offering their own statements. Margaret, her voice soft but filled with conviction, said, "Your wife handled herself with incredible dignity. That attendant was cruel." Marcus, his eyes fixed on David, added, "I got the whole thing on video if you need it." David nodded, his gaze hardening as he turned to Marcus. "I'll need that. Thank you." As Marcus handed over the video, the tension in the air shifted. David's focus never wavered. He was all business now, his protective instincts on high alert, ready to do whatever it took to make sure Naomi's suffering wouldn't go unanswered. Stephen, the airport customer service manager, approached cautiously, his face pale as he spotted David. "Mr. Carter, sir. I had no idea." David didn't even look at him. His voice was sharp, commanding. "Where is she?" Without another word, David made his way toward the security office. Inside, Christine was still arguing with airport security, her voice rising with indignation. "This is ridiculous," she spat, her face flushed with anger. That woman was non-compliant and aggressive. A security guard, trying to maintain professionalism, spoke in a calm but firm tone. "Ma'am, we have multiple witnesses saying otherwise." Christine's eyes flared with frustration. "They're lying to protect her. This is discrimination against me." David stood silently in the doorway, watching her rant without recognition. Christine didn't even turn to look at him as she continued her tirade. Do you know how many years I've worked for this airline? I've dealt with difficult passengers before. David stepped into the room quietly, his presence immediately commanding attention. Christine turned toward him, finally noticing him. Her expression froze when she saw the look in his eyes. Who are you? She demanded. This is a private. The security guard's face went white as recognition hit him like a freight train. He knew exactly who David was. David's voice was calm, but the chill in it made every word feel like ice. I'm asking you a question. What did my wife do that was so difficult? Christine hesitated, then her tone shifted, attempting to regain control. Your wife. Look, sir, I understand you're upset, but you weren't there. David's voice cut through the air, cold as steel. What made her difficult? Walk me through it. Christine, sensing the trap but still too arrogant to back down, crossed her arms defensively. She was non-compliant, entitled, breaking rules? David's eyes narrowed, his patience thinning. Which rules? Christine floundered, her words tumbling over each other. She was using her phone during turbulence. David interrupted, his voice unwavering. It was in airplane mode. FAA regulation allows that. Next. Christine's face tightened with frustration, but she pressed on. She was standing during takeoff preparation. David raised an eyebrow. For less than 10 seconds, struggling with an overhead bin while 6 months pregnant. Next. Christine stammered, her confidence faltering. She was aggressive when I tried to enforce rules. David didn't even flinch. Multiple passengers and video evidence say she was polite while you were hostile from the moment she boarded. Try again. Christine's face turned red as she fumbled for an explanation. Look, whoever you are, you don't understand the pressures of this job. David cut her off. He pulled out his ID badge from his pocket and held it up for her to see. David Carter. Chief Executive Officer. SkyBridge Airlines. The words hung in the air like a bomb going off. Christine's face drained of all color as she took in the sight of David's badge. She stuttered, her confidence shattered. I didn't. Mr. Carter, David stepped forward, his voice dropping to a dangerous level. You slapped my pregnant wife across the face. On camera. In front of 200 witnesses. Christine's eyes flickered with panic, but she still tried to justify her actions. I thought she was going to attack me. David didn't even blink. Play the video. Marcus's recording played on the security monitor. The footage was crystal clear. Christine's hostility, the way she targeted Naomi's composure, and then the slap. There was no denying it. The truth was right there on screen. Christine, now fully aware of the gravity of the situation, tried to make a break for it. She moved toward the door, but the security guard blocked her path, his face grim. You're not going anywhere, David said, his voice low and cold. Airport police are filing assault charges. Christine, now desperate, began pleading. Please, I'll lose everything. I have a union, they'll protect me. David's expression remained unmoving. Your union protects you from unfair termination. Not from criminal assault. Not from civil lawsuits. Christine's face twisted in horror, her voice breaking. It was a mistake. I've never. David's voice was steady, unwavering. This wasn't a mistake. This was targeted harassment that escalated to violence. David pulled out his phone and pressed play, the audio from Marcus's video filling the room. Christine's whispered words, maybe if you people learned respect, echoed in the room. Christine, now completely cornered, tried to argue. That's out of context. David's gaze was unyielding. There's no context that makes that acceptable. Christine's composure finally crumbled and she broke down, her hands shaking. Please, I'll apologize, I'll do anything. David shook his head, his voice hard and final. You'll apologize to Naomi. Whether she accepts it is her choice. But your career with this airline is over. The weight of his words hung in the air, and Christine knew without a doubt that her fate had been sealed. What do you think will happen to Christine now? Do you think Naomi will accept her apology? Let me know what you think in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more updates. The story isn't over yet, and you won't want to miss the next chapter. David sat at the head of the conference table in the airport's makeshift command center, his fingers steepled as he stared at the screen before him. His mind was racing, but his face was calm, too calm. He had handled crises before, but this one was different. This one hit too close to home. He leaned forward and activated the virtual call, the screens flickering to life. The faces of the airline's top executives appeared on the screen. Patricia, the head of HR, James, the chief operating officer, and Robert, the company's legal counsel. The silence between them was palpable, each of them already knowing the gravity of the situation. David's voice was steady, but the undercurrent of tension in it was unmistakable. "We have a situation that requires immediate response," he began. His eyes locked on the faces on the screen, his words sharp, commanding attention. "A passenger was assaulted by one of our senior flight attendants today. My wife. On our aircraft. I'll explain the details, but first, I need to make sure you understand the severity of this." David pressed a button and Marcus's video footage filled the screen. The silence that followed was thick. When it ended, David spoke again, his words colder now, more calculated. "That's what happened. And I want to know how this could have happened. How she was still flying with us. How this wasn't dealt with before." Patricia's face went pale as she absorbed the full scope of the incident. She turned to David, her voice barely above a whisper. "Oh my God. Is Naomi okay? Is the baby?" David's jaw tightened, but his voice remained controlled. "They're fine, no thanks to our systems." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in. "How did this happen?" James, the COO, flipped through a file, his fingers moving quickly across the pages. "She has multiple complaints in her record. Passengers have reported discriminatory behavior before." He said it as though he were reading off a standard report, but David wasn't having it. "And she was still flying?" David's voice rose with a hint of disbelief. "Still interfacing with customers?" Patricia's voice shook as she tried to explain. "The complaints were investigated. Union negotiations resulted in retraining rather than." David cut her off, his voice a controlled fury. "Retraining?" She told my wife, "You people need to learn respect." On what planet is retraining the answer to that? Robert, the legal counsel, interjected carefully, trying to bring some semblance of order to the room. "David, I understand you're upset, but we need to be careful here." "Careful?" David's eyes flashed with frustration. "A pregnant woman was assaulted on our aircraft. We need to be thorough. I want every detail, every report, and I want it now." Without another word, David ordered an audit of Christine's entire history with the airline. The HR team dug deep into her records, pulling complaints and incident reports going back 15 years. As they combed through the files, a pattern began to emerge, a disturbing pattern. There were 47 formal complaints against Christine. 23 of them involved allegations of racial discrimination. Only 3 resulted in any disciplinary action, and those were all limited to retraining sessions. Retraining? Again. 8 months ago, Rachel, the younger flight attendant who had brought Naomi crackers and juice, had raised concerns about Christine's behavior. She'd spoken to her supervisor, but her complaint had been dismissed. "Christine is set in her ways, but she's professional," they'd said. David's fury began to rise again. "This isn't just about one incident. This is systemic." His words hit like a hammer, echoing in the room. Meanwhile, the PR team had already begun to panic. #SkyBridge assault was trending, and the video had gone viral. David wasn't concerned about the PR nightmare though. He was focused on something far more important. "I don't care about the PR nightmare," he said, his voice cold. "I care that we failed passengers repeatedly, and it took my wife being assaulted for me to know about it." Patricia opened her mouth to respond, but David was already cutting her off. "There were safeguards in place, right? How did they fail?" The investigation revealed a culture of complaint suppression. Managers had actively discouraged passengers from filing formal complaints, preferring to offer service recovery compensation to silence issues instead. Union grievances took priority over passenger safety and well-being. David's frustration was palpable now. This isn't just Christine. This is systemic. This is a failure at every level. David's mind was spinning with everything he was learning, and the truth was becoming clearer and more troubling by the second. Cut to Naomi. David had returned to her after the meeting, his face grim but his voice soft as he walked into the room. Naomi had been treated and cleared by the doctors, but the emotional toll was still evident. Her hands were trembling as she sat on the edge of the bed, her mind clearly still processing everything that had happened. David sat beside her, gently taking her hand in his. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his voice low, full of concern. Naomi forced a smile, but it was weary, weighed down by everything she had endured. "Physically? Fine. But David." She paused, her voice cracking as she looked up at him. "I keep thinking about what she said. You people." David's heart sank, but he didn't show it. He squeezed her hand tighter. "I know. And I'm sorry you had to hear that. Naomi shook her head, a wave of emotion overtaking her. This wasn't just about me being difficult. She saw me, saw my skin, and decided I didn't belong in that seat. David nodded slowly, his expression darkening. I know. Naomi's voice was barely above a whisper. And you know what's scary? How many times has she done this when there wasn't a video? When the passenger wasn't married to you? David's eyes flickered with understanding. That's what I'm finding out. And it's worse than we thought. Naomi wiped a tear from her cheek, her voice steady but full of emotion. I don't want special treatment because I'm your wife. I want the airline to be safe for everyone who looks like me. David's eyes softened and he leaned in, kissing the top of her head. It will be. I promise you. Naomi squeezed his hand. Don't just fire her and move on. Fix the system. David's voice was unwavering. I'm going to. They sat there in silence for a moment, the weight of everything pressing down on them. Naomi took a deep breath and looked up at David. I'm sorry I didn't tell you it was getting bad. I thought I could handle it. David shook his head, his expression tender. You shouldn't have had to handle it. Not alone. Not ever. What do you think David should do next? Will he be able to fix the system, or will it take more than just one change? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more. You won't want to miss what happens next. David sat in the quiet of their hotel room, his laptop open in front of him. The PR team had sent over a draft statement, full of corporate buzzwords and sanitized language meant to deflect blame, to minimize the impact. But David couldn't bring himself to accept it. Not this time. He looked at Naomi, who was resting on the bed, her eyes tired but filled with determination. The weight of the past few days had taken its toll, but there was a quiet strength in her that inspired him to stand firm. He couldn't hide behind corporate jargon. Not when the truth was so clear. With a steady hand, David began typing his own statement. It wasn't going to be a carefully crafted PR piece. It was going to be raw, real, and accountable. As the words took shape on the screen, David's voice became more resolute. I'm David Carter, CEO of SkyBridge Airlines, he began. Earlier today, my wife Naomi was assaulted by one of our flight attendants. But this statement isn't about my wife specifically, it's about the systemic failures that allowed this to happen. David paused for a moment, then clicked play on the video footage, with Naomi's permission of course. He knew it would be hard to watch, but it was necessary. He needed to show the world the reality of what had happened. The video played, and the rawness of the situation hit the public in a way that no corporate statement ever could. David spoke over the video as it continued to roll, his voice steady but full of conviction. The employee in question has been terminated and is facing criminal charges. But that's not enough. An internal investigation revealed this employee had 47 complaints, 23 alleging discriminatory behavior. She was still flying. That's on us. David leaned forward, his face filled with the weight of his responsibility. We failed our passengers. We prioritized liability management over accountability. That ends today. David announced immediate changes that would take effect across the airline: a third-party audit of all HR practices, the implementation of an anonymous reporting system for discrimination, and mandatory bias training for all employees, including executives. Victims of previous incidents can come forward, and their claims will be reviewed, he added firmly. He looked directly into the camera, speaking with a sincerity that cut through the screen. To the passengers who complained and weren't heard, I'm sorry. We failed you. To Naomi, I'm sorry you had to experience this. I'm sorry my airline, my responsibility hurt you. We'll do better. Not because it went viral. Not because it was my wife. But because it's right. The video, raw and unfiltered, went viral for all the right reasons. It wasn't just a statement, it was a declaration of accountability. David wasn't hiding. He was owning the failure and making it clear that things were going to change starting now. Christine, on the other hand, sat at home, staring at her phone in disbelief. The messages were flooding in, texts from friends, family, and former co-workers, all reacting to the statement. Her hands shook as she read the comments. They weren't supportive. Far from it. Her union rep called and she answered quickly, the desperation in her voice clear. Christine, we can't defend assault. You're on your own. Christine's stomach churned as she dropped the phone on the table. She was in free fall and there was no one to catch her. Her name and face were plastered all over social media. Former passengers had started coming forward, sharing their own stories of mistreatment at her hands. The doorbell rang and Christine froze. Her heart pounded as she opened the door to find airport police standing on the other side. They were there with a warrant for her arrest. The charges? Assault. Battery. Naomi had filed a civil lawsuit against her, and now Christine was facing the consequences. She was handcuffed and led out of her home, her world unraveling with every step. As Christine sat in the back of the police car, her mind raced. How did it all come to this? She wondered. She had always gotten away with it before, always protected by the union, by her seniority. But now everything she had built, everything she had relied on, was crumbling, and it was her own doing. Meanwhile, David was already taking action, ensuring that SkyBridge Airlines would never be the same. In the weeks following the incident, a series of systemic changes began to unfold. Company-wide meetings were held to address discrimination and bias within the airline. New leadership was brought into HR, and a complaint review board was established, one that included passenger advocates to ensure that all concerns were heard and acted upon. Rachel, the young flight attendant who had helped Naomi during the flight, was promoted to a new training role. She would now be responsible for teaching new attendants what accountability truly looked like, ensuring that the lessons learned from this tragic event would not be forgotten. Margaret, the elderly passenger who had offered Naomi the pillow, received a personal thank you from David. Her simple act of kindness had been a beacon of decency in the midst of chaos. "Thank you," David said, shaking her hand firmly. "You reminded us all what it means to show compassion." Marcus, the young businessman who had filmed the entire incident, was hired as a passenger experience consultant. David looked at him with respect, knowing that Marcus had done what few others would have. He saw what was wrong and documented it for the world to see. "I need people like you," David said, nodding in approval. 3 managers who had suppressed previous complaints were fired. Their inaction had been a key part of the problem, and David made it clear that such behavior would no longer be tolerated. Union negotiations were held and a new contract was signed. The agreement included a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination, a step that would set a precedent not just within SkyBridge, but across the industry. SkyBridge's reputation, once tarnished, was now undergoing a complete overhaul. The incident had sparked an industry-wide reckoning. Other airlines began reviewing their own policies, taking a hard look at how they handled discrimination and passenger complaints. And Naomi? She closed her $50 million business deal. The client, clearly impressed with Naomi's strength, told her, "We saw what happened. The grace you showed? That's who we want to work with." As David stood beside Naomi, watching her navigate this painful chapter with such resilience, he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride. They had both been through hell, but they were emerging stronger, and they were making sure the world knew it. What do you think? Do you believe the changes David is making will be enough? Or will it take even more to fix the culture at SkyBridge? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter in this powerful story of justice and transformation. 6 weeks had passed since the ordeal with Christine, but the weight of everything that had happened still hung heavy in the air. Naomi, now 8 months pregnant, sat at the kitchen table, her growing belly more visible than ever as she flipped through a stack of complaint letters. The letters had come through the new reporting system David had put in place after everything went down. Each letter told a story, some heartfelt, some heartbreaking, but all of them revealing the same truth: Naomi wasn't alone. There were others who had suffered just like her. Naomi paused on a particular letter, the words hitting her like a punch to the gut. She read it aloud to David, her voice thick with emotion. A black teenager was humiliated on a flight last year. Same attendant. Same pattern. She stopped pursuing her dream of being a pilot because of it. David, sitting across from her, didn't need to ask. He could hear the pain in her voice. "You okay?" he asked, his tone soft, his eyes filled with concern. Naomi glanced up at him, her eyes reflecting the same sadness that had been growing in her for weeks. "We reached out to her. Offered mentorship, flight training scholarships," David added, trying to offer a silver lining. Naomi nodded, but it wasn't enough. "That's good. But we can't give back what was taken." David's jaw tightened, his eyes dark with resolve. "No. But we can make sure it doesn't happen again." Naomi's gaze dropped to the letter again, her fingers tracing the words. "Can you though? Really?" she whispered, almost to herself. David didn't answer right away. He leaned back in his chair, thinking. "I have to believe we can," he said finally. "Otherwise, what are we doing?" The room fell into a quiet, contemplative silence. Naomi set the letter down and exhaled slowly. The words of the passengers, the people who had reached out, the stories of lives changed, they all weighed heavily on her, on both of them. David was right. Change could be made, but it wouldn't happen overnight. It would take time. But they had to start somewhere. A few days later, Naomi received a letter in the mail. Not just any letter, but one written in Christine's hand. It was long, the pages covered in ink, each word filled with regret. Naomi's heart raced as she began to read, her eyes scanning over the apology. The letter was raw, no excuses, no deflections. Christine acknowledged everything, her racism, her bitterness, her cruelty. "I saw you as a threat to what I thought I deserved," she wrote. "I saw your skin before I saw your humanity. There's no excuse for that." Naomi's eyes welled with tears as she read on, each sentence weighing on her heart. Christine admitted to destroying her career, her reputation, and, most painfully, her life. "I hurt you and your child. I traumatized you. I contributed to a system that dehumanizes people who look like you." The final words were the hardest to read. "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know, I see now what I couldn't see then. I was wrong. Completely, totally, inexcusably wrong." David was sitting beside Naomi, his hand on hers as she read aloud. When she finished, he looked at her, his expression unreadable. "What do you want to do?" he asked quietly. Naomi let out a shaky breath. "I don't know. Part of me wants to crumple it up. Part of me thinks this is the first honest thing she's said." David squeezed her hand, his voice steady. "You don't owe her forgiveness." Naomi looked at him, her heart torn. "I know. But maybe I owe myself peace." Naomi picked up a pen and began to write her response. Her words were careful, measured, but firm. "I don't forgive you. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I hope you mean what you wrote. I hope you spend the rest of your life proving it." She folded the letter and sealed it. It was her choice. It was her way of taking back control. Weeks passed, and with each one, SkyBridge Airlines began to transform. David had made sure of it. The changes were sweeping, and the ripple effects were felt across the entire company. Company-wide meetings were held to address discrimination, with new leadership brought in for HR. A new complaint review board was established, one that included passenger advocates to ensure that every voice was heard. Rachel, the young flight attendant who had helped Naomi, was promoted to a new training role. She was now responsible for teaching new attendants the importance of accountability, not just to the company but to the passengers they served. She would ensure that what had happened to Naomi would never happen again. Margaret, the elderly woman who had offered Naomi the pillow, received a personal thank you from David. He knew that her simple act of kindness had made all the difference. "You reminded us what it means to show compassion," he told her sincerely. Marcus, the young businessman who had filmed the entire incident, was hired as a passenger experience consultant. David respected what Marcus had done. He saw the injustice, recorded it, and made sure it couldn't be swept under the rug. "I need people like you," David told him. And then there were the managers who had suppressed complaints about Christine. They were fired, their actions inexcusable. The union had been forced to revise its stance on discrimination, and a zero-tolerance policy was implemented. The airline was evolving, and it wasn't just a response to one viral video. It was about doing the right thing for everyone. SkyBridge Airlines wasn't just changing. It was setting a new standard for the industry. Other airlines began to follow suit, reviewing their own policies, looking at how they treated their passengers, and ensuring they weren't perpetuating the same kind of injustice that had been allowed to go unchecked for so long. One afternoon, David and Naomi found themselves at the airport again. This time it was for a flight to San Francisco. Naomi, now nearing the end of her pregnancy, felt a tightness in her chest. It was a simple flight, just a few hours, but the memories of everything that had happened were still fresh. David noticed Naomi's anxiety, and he gently took her hand. "We can drive. We can take a different airline. Whatever you need," he said, his voice soft and full of care. Naomi shook her head, her fingers tightening around his. "No. I need to do this." They boarded the flight, and Naomi was greeted by a young Latina flight attendant with a warm smile. "Welcome aboard. Can I help you with anything?" Naomi nodded. "Just some water, thank you." The attendant brought the water immediately, her smile genuine. "Let me know if you need anything at all." Naomi settled into her seat, feeling the familiar flutter in her stomach as the baby kicked. She placed a hand on her belly, her nerves slowly easing. David looked over at her. "You good?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. Naomi smiled softly. "I'm good." The plane took off, climbing higher into the sky. Naomi looked out the window, her thoughts drifting. Voiceover, "Naomi, what happened to me wasn't unique. It was just visible. For every person who records, who speaks up, who demands better, there are 100 who suffer in silence. Change doesn't happen because one person's story goes viral. It happens because we refuse to accept that this is just how things are. She paused, her fingers lightly caressing her belly. I was lucky. I had resources, support, a platform. But nobody should need to be married to a CEO to be treated with dignity. Naomi took a deep breath, her eyes focused on the horizon. The flight attendant who slapped me lost everything. But the system that protected her for years? That's what we're really fighting. Her voice softened, the truth settling in. This isn't about revenge. It's about making sure the next pregnant woman, the next tired traveler, the next person who just wants to get home, doesn't have to be extraordinary to be treated like a human being. What do you think? Do you believe Naomi's actions will spark lasting change in the airline industry? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories.